Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I'd like to start out talking a little bit about reincarnation. As you know, according to Meyer teachings, we've got a material consciousness and a spiritual consciousness. The spiritual consciousness has a driving force behind it called the spirit form. Your spirit form is essentially, operationally speaking, and a fragment of the universal consciousness. The spirit form resides in the middle of your brain in an area called the superior colliculus. The superior colliculus controls eyesight, the movement of your eyes, the integration of sight with your other senses. The spirit form is the part of you that never dies. It lasts for basically eternity. It eventually, though, will merge back with the universal consciousness after you've finished your 7 evolutionary steps. All human races go through 7 evolutionary steps. The first of which is primitive life, then rational life, then intelligent life, and then real life, life and creational wisdom. The 6th stage, which is a half physical, half spiritual stage, and then the 7th final stage is a completely spiritual stage. So you will have millions and millions of incarnations. The material consciousness is the aspect of you that lives during a material lifetime. Your material consciousness is made up of something called the psyche, your conscious mind, your unconscious mind, your subconscious mind, your personality. The psyche controls the thoughts and the feelings of the material consciousness. It's unfortunately called the soul. It's kind of a misnomer. The spiritual consciousness has something called the Gemut. The Gemut is a German term which refers to the block or factor which controls the thoughts and the feelings of the spiritual consciousness. The other thing that the Gemut does is it sends what are called these swinging harmonious waves to the psyche. And my speculation is that's what tends to put us back into the neutral, positive, equalized thinking. So there's an energy band around our planet. You could think of it as another dimension. It's called the spirit realm. And there are many, many spirit forms in this spirit realm. These spirit forms are in what you would call the death phase, which is actually just a different aspect of life. And, for example, every human spirit form in the spirit realm also has what's called its own overall consciousness block. And what it does in the spirit realm, the spirit form works with this overall consciousness block to generate a new personality and a new material consciousness. And the new material consciousness will have a conscious mind, a subconscious mind, and an unconscious mind. The subconscious mind will be programmed with all the evolutive values of your previous lifetime. In other words, your love, your wisdom, your logic, your patience, your discernment, your assiduousness, your meticulousness, all these different aspects are programmed into your subconsciousness. So that's how the information or the level of evolution from the last life gets carried forward into the next life. Because in the next life, you have to grow up again. The material consciousness has to evolve. However, it has an advantage now in that it has the wisdom of all the accumulated evolutive values are stored in the subconscious, and these values will impulse the material consciousness during the next lifetime. So 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg during intercourse, the spirit form in the new consciousness is pulled into the body of the child, basically into the brain. The spirit form goes in the superior colliculus, and it sends out its spiritual energy throughout the body. The heart starts to beat, the fetus starts to think, and this fetus will have deeper thoughts than you realize. It's really quite amazing the level of thinking that goes on with this little creature who is now living on consciousness evolution. It just, with the entering of the spirit form, it switched from impulse evolution, which is much like plants, to consciousness evolution. And the purpose of our lifetime, in every lifetime, is the evolution of our consciousness. So, during the process of growing up, this child has to grow up again, and it has to learn how to read and write and walk and talk. It will start to get impulses from these evolutive values in its subconscious. It will also get impulses from the spiritual consciousness and impulses from these universal storage banks, because the universal storage bank also records everything from the previous life. So these impulses help the child mature at a quicker rate during its next lifetime. And this is how wisdom is kind of built on wisdom. Typically, our conscious mind does not remember the previous lives. And this is a good thing, because we really need to be focusing on the current lifetime and focusing on the evolution that was required during the current lifetime. And the distraction of the previous life's traumas could almost disturb us to the point of insanity. So this is very much a benefit that the creation sends to us. In other words, we get to forget all the traumas, all the difficulties associated with what for the normal Earth human would be 4 million previous lifetimes. Your spirit form, if you're a typical Earth human, is about 4 million years old. So that's too many traumas to relive. So it's a good thing that we don't remember all these lifetimes. Now, some people do. Some people will come in and they'll have this trauma from a previous life that's still there. We ideally spend about a lifetime and a half in the spirit realm. So if you lived 100 years in a physical life, ideally we would spend about 152 years in the spirit realm. Now what's happened because of overpopulation, spirit forms are spending less and less and less and less time in the spirit realm. And this is causing problems because all the past life memories are not getting processed. Not enough of these evolutive values are being stored in the subconscious. And it has other weird side effects, like it's much more difficult to have a correctly formed male mentality in the next life if this happens. And it also causes more dependence on the parents. So this horrific problem that we're facing of overpopulation is affecting not only the physical realm, but the spirit realm. And both sides should be in kind of a balance. Everything in nature, everything in the universe is designed to be in this balance. So you will have millions and millions of reincarnations, and you will live many, many lifetimes. And if everything goes according to plan, in each one of these lifetimes, you will acquire more and more and more evolutive values. And with each new lifetime, this group of evolutive values will be programmed into your subconscious. Now, the first thing, the entry point into your conscious mind, so to speak, is the unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind works very quickly. It recognizes patterns. It works very fast. If you pull your hand away from a hot stove, it's the unconscious mind that's feeling that heat before the conscious mind even knows about it. So all of these different aspects play a role in reincarnation. You have a whole lineage of previous personalities which you could think of as almost like an extended family. These other aspects of you that lived before you. Each of them is unique, but each one of these people had the same spirit form that you do now. So you have a lineage, which is a very interesting thing to think about, a lineage of previous personalities going back many, many millions of years. I think the first naturally evolving Earth humans appeared on the Earth about 9 to 12 million years ago. And it would be very, very interesting to trace back your lineage of previous lives, all of those years. It might even be a little disturbing. So maybe this forgetting that we have is really quite a blessing. See, your spirit form is not really so conscious at this point in our evolution. Eventually we get into the age of recognitions where we can handle the knowledge of our previous lives. And eventually our spirit form will be completely conscious and it will merge back with creation. But right now your spirit form is kind of running in the background. It's absorbing this information. It's like recording all your thoughts and your feelings. It also will give you feedback on your thoughts and let you know if your feelings and thoughts are running correctly. If you learn to pay attention to your spirit form, it will impulse you, and this is discussed in spiritual teachings and the 10th contact report between Semyase and Billy. And you remember that Semyase was Billy's third contact. And I guess you could call her a mentor, even though Billy at this point was about 40 years old or so. But she taught him the spiritual teachings, met with Billy for several years. I don't think she finished the 11-year period that occurred with Swath and Asket. But I thought I would just, during the first 15 minutes of the show here, re-talk about some of the things associated with reincarnation. And one of the things, again, I want to mention is that the Gemut sends those harmonious waves over to the psyche, which I believe then help to restabilize the psyche into neutral positive thinking, because we're really going to need some neutral positive thinking. One of the things that's talked about in Contact Report 544 is the possible collapse of the United States. This is a thing I cover periodically, and I'm one of the people that's hoping, that's of the opinion that we're making progress and we're not going to destroy ourselves. I'm putting that thought out there so that we do not destroy the United States. But in 1975, Billy had the great trip in the mothership. And during that time, back in 1975, it was said the probability calculations were such that the superpower of the USA would come to an end after 2020 if nothing changes for the better. Well, I'm one of the people that's hoping for the better, that things have changed for the better, and that will at least last longer than 2020. On the other hand, in 1975, you especially raised the enormous contradictions with regard to politics, and we have tremendous contradictions with regard to politics and the economy, and the decline of our culture is very obvious, and the felonies of our politicians is incredible. Okay, there's been something that's happened at a college that I just learned about, and maybe this is where the real problems are going to cause or come from, our colleges. And I'm going to play a rather long clip to let you hear and understand, I think, something that is very significant and strange that's happened. Let me switch over. Hopefully I won't screw this up, but here we go.
Contractor / corporate version of that.
Hello, freak bitches. For people that don't know what's going on, let's lay out all the events that have transpired. Essentially, you were being asked to step away from your college for a day. Is that what it was? Is it one day?
Well, this goes back farther than that.
Let's lay out the whole thing.
Okay, so we couldn't possibly lay out the whole thing.
But let's just, for people that have no idea what's going on,
right?
They're listening right now, and they're like, who's this Brett Weinstein guy?
So the core of it surrounds a tradition that we have at Evergreen called Day of Absence. And this tradition stretches back long before I was ever at the college. I've been there 15 years. This tradition stretches back into, I think, the early 70s. And it's built around a play written by Douglas Turner Ward, a black playwright. And the play portrays events in a fictional town where the black population decides not to show up one day in order to emphasize their roles in the town that the white population is unaware of. And as you would imagine, all hell breaks loose. So anyway, it's an excellent play. And some early faculty at our college decided that we should have a day that mirrored this event, and that originally black faculty and students, and then later people of color, would leave campus for a day to emphasize the role that they play in our community, and then they would later the tradition was amended and had a day of presence added to it where people would come back to campus. And this has been going on, as I said, since the 70s and the whole time I've been there. And then this year, it was announced by the organizing committee that the situation would be reversed, and they asked white student staff and faculty not to come to campus, and that did not at all sit well with me. As I said in my letter to the person who had announced this, Rashida, who I should say is staff, and she has ended up at the center of this controversy, I think wrongly, just because my letter in response is addressed to her, and then it was made public by our school paper, so her name has been dragged front and center. But in any case, my letter, I said that there was all the difference in the world between a population deciding to absent themselves from a shared space in order to highlight their role, and a population deciding to absent another population from a shared space, which I find unacceptable as a person, as somebody devoted to the gains of the civil rights movement. And I should also probably say, as a Jew, when people start telling me where I can and cannot be, it rings alarm bells. So that's the gist of the story. And the letter caused quite a stir amongst student staff and faculty who responded, many of them quite angrily. Privately, of course, people were much more divided on the matter, and there were plenty of people who agreed with my letter. But publicly speaking, there was condemnation of the letter. But the event itself, Day of Absence, was mostly uneventful. I did go to campus, as I said I would in my letter, and I actually, it's neither here nor there, it was accidental, but while I was on campus, I ran into a student that I know very well, actually a student that my wife and I were abroad in Ecuador with last year. We were teaching abroad, and we had 30 students with us. And so one of the students who had traveled with us to Ecuador happened to be on campus, too. This is a student of color.
I'm going to stop this. Sorry.
That's all right.
That was going to go on. That was going to drive me crazy.
Right, I understand.
Let's keep going.
So I ran into this student that I know well and care about quite a bit, and we had a very nice conversation, mostly not about Day of Absence. As a matter of fact, I can't even remember if we did talk about Day of Absence, but there was something poignant to me about the fact that while I was being condemned for refusing to accept this new formulation, that I was able to meet with a student who is important to me, and neither of our racial backgrounds is primary in our relationship. We know each other as people, and that's really how I would like to see all of us interacting on campus. We all have our backgrounds; they matter to us, but it cannot become the primary interface between us.
Let me stop you here, and let me try to understand what the reaction was, because you rightly said that you think there's a huge problem with asking people to not show up simply based on their color of their skin.
Exactly.
And what was the argument against that? Like when you said that, and I read your letter, and your letter didn't sound racist at all. It sounded very well thought out. It made a very good point. But the response, the inflammatory response to your letter was so disturbing and shocking. Was there anyone who had reasonable debate with you about this? Was there anyone who said, well, we should take into consideration why they're asking us to do this? We should sit down with them. We should talk through this. Was there anything reasonable, or was it just dig your heels in the sand and then let the insults and the white privilege and all these accusations fly?
Well, like I said, there's a huge difference that you can't see unless you're at the center of one of these things between the public discussion and the private discussion. Privately, very interesting discussions with many people. That was not absent. But if you were to look in on the discussion at the public level, it looked as if there was consensus united against me.
Now, when you say public and private, are the same people making contradictory statements in public that are commiserating with you in private, or is it just different people?
A few of them do that. That actually is the thing I find most surprising, is that sometimes people will privately say one thing to you and then publicly do another. Mostly it's different people. And I should say the people who have talked to me privately and expressed concerns are actually quite a diverse group. So it's not as if white folks are disturbed by this and people of color are united. It's not at all like that. But part of the hidden story here is that in order to advance certain policy proposals, it has to appear that the community is united behind them and that anybody who stands against them is standing against them for illegitimate reasons. So that means that the number of people who are willing to express any sort of nuance about what's taking place has to be small, and they have to be dismissible. So what they did is they called me a racist, which is ironic, because I'm an anti-racist. I've gone out of my way to, first of all, study the question of why racism occurs, and I believe been pretty courageous in fighting against it where I've run into it. So to challenge me with that particular epithet was a mistake on their part. It was a strategic mistake. And I kept trying to tell them, while this was still internally being discussed in the college, I kept trying to tell them that they should really check the concept that I'm a racist. They should ask, because if they did, they would discover that they were actually way off the mark, and then they would have an interesting puzzle on their hands. Then they would have to explain to themselves why they had found themselves hurling this most poisonous term at somebody who not only isn't a racist, but is pretty nearly the opposite.
Well, it's a standard maneuver when someone wants to silence someone, when someone wants to put someone in a category that's instantly recognizable. One of the best ones is racist.
Oh, absolutely. And what I found is that people simply could not figure out what they would do if that term was applied to them.
Right.
They were able to preview in their minds what that would be like. And so many people could see that there was no escape for them.
Right.
So
it's like being called a rapist almost. It's like even if you are exonerated, there's still that cloud hanging above you.
Yes, but this also actually points to something pretty important. And for anybody who travels this ground themselves, they're going to discover this, that many of the terms that are being used have been redefined, but they haven't been fully redefined. So one of the things that I've seen in several places is that a term like racist has been redefined so that the bar for being a racist is so low that you couldn't possibly help but trip over it. But then once you've tripped over it and you have accepted that you are a racist, then the stigma goes back to the original definition. So it is the dodging and weaving between the two definitions that actually does the heavy lifting.
Well, there's also a really disturbing idea that's being bounced around lately that it's impossible to be racist if you're anything other than white.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
It's preposterous. Anybody who looks up the actual definition of racism will discover that that's preposterous. But yes, that does pass in certain places as logical.
Yeah, and just it's parroted in this very bizarre way that's supposed to be unchallenged. And this is a fairly recent thing. I mean, this is not something that existed 2 decades ago, right?
I agree. And the pace at which it's moving in the last few years is very surprising.
It is surprising, but it kind of makes sense because you get into these groups of people. They have this confirmation bias. They lump up together, and they all reinforce their ideas in this echo chamber, and they all do it inside the colleges. And then when it gets out to the rest of the world, as we're seeing with your case at Evergreen, the rest of the world is like, what is going on over here? Like, what is happening in school? And people who are sending their children off to school are very concerned with the indoctrination of these ideas and adopting these very rigid mindsets that the rest of the world just simply could pick apart pretty quickly.
Well, this is the most shocking thing because I haven't been censured. I haven't been suspended. I'm still on the email distribution list. So I'm watching the traffic inside of my college, and I'm able to compare it to the huge flood of stuff that I'm seeing from the outside world as they get wind of what's going on at Evergreen. And the difference is a million miles. Inside of Evergreen, actually, we are descending further into madness. The faculty are blaming the fact that the campus had to be suddenly closed due to a threat from the outside yesterday on me for having talked about this in the outside world, specifically for...
It's hilarious. Not to you.
I can't use that term yet.
To me, hopefully someday.
So I hope it's soon. And, I must say, one thing that I don't, we haven't even talked about where I got thrust into the spotlight here, which your listeners are going to have to know in order to understand why I'm even sitting here. But
well, that's another example of the weird division in the United States. Professor Brent Weinstein at Evergreen College is being called a racist for not observing a day of absence where white people weren't allowed to be on campus. And he didn't like the fact that they were not allowing people on campus based on their race, and he thought it was a kind of a bad precedent to set. And he's physically in danger now. He's had to move off the campus for a while. The students were so insane they basically barricaded the president in his office for a while. And I've seen some of you'll have to go and look and see some of the clips on YouTube to really understand this and to wrap your mind around it. I'm not sure that it's rational. It's completely irrational. That's what we're seeing. It's just like the election. I mean, people are reacting in such irrational ways that, maybe this whole Civil War thing's a possibility. I bring this as kind of an evidence just to kind of wake us up and keep us focused on the ideas that we need to. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about the book, The Might of Thoughts. I've actually lost count. I think this is still the fourth time I'm going through this. I'd have to go back and, this may be the fifth. I don't know. I don't wear that as a badge of accomplishment so much as just, recognizing that I have problems in my own thoughts, and for some reason I feel better when I read this book, and it helps me to kind of put me in a neutral, positive state. And I've kind of developed the habit of reading this book every morning. And one of the things that Meyer Material talks about here, even in the Might of Thoughts book, is that, good thinking leads to good feelings, and then out of good feelings you can have good habits, and the good habits lead to good circumstances in your life. And we can no longer hide the evolution of our consciousness. The evolution of our consciousness is much like a tree. There's a visible part, which is the external you, and an invisible part, an internal you, like the roots of the tree. So the external and the internal growth should be imbalanced. And when there is a balance, the tree survives stormy weather. If there is no balance, the tree tends to fall down. And Elizabeth Moosberger, in the book The Might of Thought, said one of the most interesting things. She said, "This book is dedicated to a humankind that's ill in its consciousness." So we have to remember that we are ill in our consciousness, and it's manifesting very profoundly in certain aspects of our society. And as we saw in the last clip, which was, I know, extremely long, we're seeing, I think, the manifestation of the illness in the consciousness mostly in the certain aspects of society, like kids at schools, and the people on the far left, I think, have been very ill in their consciousness. So remember, in order to have the evolution of your consciousness, you need to have independent thinking. And our independent thinking is stunted because we're a consumer society. Everything is pre-chewed for us on the television, on the radio, on the newspapers, in the magazines, in the books. So there's very few that have independent thinking. And I would like to think the people who listen to this show, the people who study the Meyer Material, are good independent thinkers. One of the things that destroys independent thinking is religion, and I've been talking about religions, particularly the Old Testament lately, with the story of Jehovah, who the Meyer Material says was actually one of the Giza intelligences. He wasn't the creator of the universe. His real name was Hen. And if you study some of the episodes related to Jehovah in the Old Testament, like when Jehovah telepathically tells Adam to sacrifice his son, and Abraham very nearly did, put his son on an altar with sticks that he was going to set on fire, and not only kill his son, but burn the body. And there's an interesting Italian researcher named Mario Biglino who has a practical explanation why what he calls the Elohim, because in the Old Testament they're referred to as the Elohim as a group, a plural. Elohim is a plural term. And he says these Elohim, who I think they're analogous to these Giza intelligences, enjoy the smell of burning flesh. And as I've said before, when your cells oxidize in space flight, in the spacesuits and in the enclosed capsules, often you'll have the smell of grilling meat. So perhaps these Elohim, like Jehovah, were soothed by that. So, in any case, religions are one of the things that takes away the independent thinking. For example, in the case of Abraham, he became totally dependent in his thinking, wasn't independent enough to say, hey, this isn't right. I shouldn't have to kill my own son. Of course, Jehovah stepped back and said, no, you don't have to kill your son. I just was testing you. So go get this ram over here and kill it and burn the flesh because I like to smell this burning meat. Now, religion will say the burning of these burnt offerings was looking forward to the time of Christ somehow. I'll let you decide whether or not that's true. But the point here is we need to think independently because we're responsible for our thoughts. We're responsible for the circumstances of our life. And if we think in a dependent way, we give our responsibility over to someone else. And that can lead us to get very badly out of control of the good human nature. It makes us very dependent, and it creates a vicious cycle that's very difficult for us to get out of. And Asartung is the German word which means to get very badly out of control of the good human nature. Too positive thinking or too negative thinking can do this. So our might is anchored in our thoughts, and we need to learn to control our thoughts because we're the forgers of our own fortune. The external circumstances of life eventually conform to your thoughts. You have tremendous power in your thinking. You can control the circumstances of your life. There are certain things which happen, of course, that are out of your control, but by the most part, if you learn the power to think in a neutral, positive form, you can improve the circumstances of your life over time more and more and more. And we need to clarify our thoughts. We make an effort to do that. We need to practice harmonious thinking. We need to have patience. And clarify means to make a statement or a situation less confused and more clearly comprehensible. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make life comprehensible by having neutral positive thinking, because as soon as you lose neutral positive thinking, you can go into confusion and uncertainty. And remember, under confusion, the boundaries between things tend to blur. But our thoughts need to have purpose and clarity, and you can ask yourself or tell yourself about 6 different things to reset your thinking. I'm optimistic. I'm confident. I'm relaxed. I'm cheerful. I'm enthusiastic. I'm thankful. If you can tell yourself these 6 things, then you can start to bring back the garden of your consciousness. The garden meaning all the beautiful green plants in your consciousness from having those positive, healthy thoughts. Let me read a little bit to you from the book, The Might of Thoughts. This is on page 232. In order to fulfill the life, there need to be strong human beings who control themselves in every regard, who cope so well with life and all its problems, obstacles, and difficulties, that they can also exist as individual reason in the mass of humanity. Remember, we were talking about independent thinking. But what means being really strong and always overcoming everything in the context of adequately fulfilling evolution? Therefore, a potential of inner perseverance and persistence is important. Let me get back to that. Remember the word assiduousness, which is our vocabulary word from yesterday. That's that inner perseverance and persistence, as well as the power of resistance, must be developed and integrated into the might of the thoughts. so that the created idea can be realized by means of these thoughts. The ability to strive for progress, and let me stop there, because striving is one of the creational natural laws. And the more you strive, the greater will your happiness be. Striving is life. Striving is happiness. There is no happiness outside of striving. If you're an unhappy person, get to work on something, even if it's cleaning out your garage. And you'll go back into a neutral positive state, and then you have a shop. The ability to strive for progress is creationally and naturally given to the human being. And because of this ability, he or she is able, by means of the power of his or her consciousness and thoughts, to make him or herself strong in all these things and values which are necessary for any form of evolution. So your striving will make you strong. And the world needs strong human beings with perseverance. Let me continue down on this line here. This is a fact which the human being must make clear to him or herself until the consciousness acknowledges and accepts this affirmation as fact. In order to create a secure, firm basis with it, which makes clear that all the human being's abilities, activities, and capabilities actually lie in himself or herself, in his or her consciousness, and in the resulting thoughts, through the might of which everything finally manifests. And indeed, both in the inner consciousness-based and inner base form, as well as in the outer realm, where one's nature is put on to show. So remember, we have the inner nature, who you are based on the true self, which is related to your spiritual consciousness. And we also have an external nature, which is threatened by your evolution. So you have part of yourself, your artificial I, your external nature. It's actually threatened by your evolution, and it's going to fight against your evolution. And one of the things that occurs again and again is the negative repeating thoughts. The thoughts can be forced into a cycle in which the same thoughts and themes of thoughts appear over and over again. A rotation of the thoughts occurs. And it's difficult to free yourself from these rotating thoughts. For some reason, negative thoughts grow wildly. Every human being, therefore, can fall prey to insanity by these negative repeating thoughts. So you need to learn to break free of these. But you are the Lord and Master of your own circumstances. What you think becomes real. Good and positive thoughts, you need to tend them, to nurture them, and you need to have a good opinion of yourself. To nurture means to protect, to support, to encourage. All these thoughts are so important, these positive, neutral positive thoughts, because you will attract what you think. The human being attracts what you are. So, and this is one of the things that comes down from the Arhat Athrasata level. Correct thinking and knowledge is such a monstrous power that it is able to ceaselessly attract and bring into being everything that the human thinks and longs for. Arhat Athrasata is that first level where the pure spirit forms dwell. So that's the final stage of evolution for the human being, is the Arhat Athrasata level. I want to talk a little bit more about this inner persistence idea and how important it is to be assiduous, to have inner persistence. with the whole process of thinking, the inner persistence is of particular significance, which is why it is absolutely necessary that it be created. The persistence created by the consciousness is actually an essential quality which must first be created by the human being. That is your assiduousness. Because it is not simply an innate capability, rather it is a factor which is connected with one's upbringing, one's parents and guardians, and your personal upbringing of yourself. Some people have a weak inner persistence. And those without persistence do not cope with anything in their lives, and they always remain small and weak, without initiative and destructive in many things. Criticism. And it's funny, I notice in myself about certain things, I'm not as open towards criticism as I am in other areas. Let me touch on one more thing before we leave the might of thoughts discussion. I want to talk a little bit about the zeal, the end point, the culmination point. The source of life power, which must be created by oneself, lies in the consciousness, that is to say, in the thoughts, which must be formed, intended, and nurtured in such a way that they correspond to a progressive kind and wise, equipped with a zeal for life, an intention, an endeavor, an idea, and a good positive life zeal, a culmination point. In other words, you're focused on your evolution. Now, this is a contrast to the tangled ideas that confuse the thoughts and abruptly go from one extreme to another, whereby misdirections of thoughts arises, which triggers emotions and can even lead to murder and manslaughter. So that's what we're seeing in this movement towards civil war. People just have gotten so far out of control in their thinking that we're seeing just the most bizarre behaviors that at least I've ever seen in my life. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to concentrate for the last 15 minutes of the show here on the book, The Way to Live. You know, 3 books I recommend you get are, one is The Psyche, one's The Way to Live, and one is The Might of Thoughts. So The Way to Live, and I talked about this earlier, the memories of the earlier life would influence the new personality. In other words, the forgetting, when I was talking about reincarnation, the forgetting is so important, because without forgetting, and you should allow yourself to forget memories which are painful. Sometimes we replay those painful memories, and we shouldn't. We need to learn to forget, because you can cause a devastating confusion. You can impair your consciousness to the point of insanity. Forgetting is a protection for the consciousness. And allowing yourself to forget is what will free your mind up for your evolvement. Now, I talk about the false I, not your true spiritual inner I, but your false I, your external self, let's call it. This I attempts to complicate and deny everything. Remember, it's threatened by your evolution. So don't be too surprised if you're doing great and then all of a sudden, boom, the inner I, the negative inner I, erupts, because it's fighting for survival. Because the information in these books will evolve your consciousness, and the inner I will be very threatened by that. The inner I attempts to sabotage your evolution. And it has a kind of tyranny, the inner eye does. It produces a Gewaltsamkeit, which is, again, Gewalt is a kind of a brutal activity. There's really no way to translate that word. But the inner eye can be it can be tyrannical. It's characterized by Gewalt zum Kite. So one of the ways to fight against the inner eye is to remember a moment of gladness, a moment of peace and of relaxation, something that you treasure. And the German word for a moment is Augenblick. A moment, again, is this joy that comes forth from the human's inner part, this poise that we start to get. Unfortunately, everything from modern society almost is done in such a way that your neutral positive impulses will be blocked. There's the music, the activities will suppress your neutral positive impulses. Now, suppress means to prevent the development. It will restrain these neutral positive impulses. And what happens is, you don't want to forget your moments of gladness. You want to hold on to these things that produce in you this neutral positive state. Remember, harmony is what we're looking for. And nothing lasts forever. And that's one of except maybe our spirit form. And in that way, we should think of ourselves like the waves of the ocean. Human beings are, in the book, are described as waves of the ocean. And this will help you to put life in a different frame of reference. Let me say that. Human beings are like the waves of an ocean. As far as they reach, they are connected with each other through the mass of the water. And as it is with the life of the human being, a wave has a beginning and an end, a becoming and passing, a birth and a death. And just as the part piece of the creational spirit in the human being is a unity with all other creational spirit part pieces, and with the creation itself, and it also has its own identity. It is also thus with the waves of the ocean, because every one of them has its own existence. Every wave has its character and the behavior of its own, whereby there arises an unending diversity, as is also the case with the human being. As is exactly the case with every human being, every wave comprises an independent entity. Just as the wave is full of water, the human being is full of the part piece of the creational spirit. The creational spirit conveys the human being's behavior in the form that he or she is striving, is evolutively active, exactly as the water pushes the waves to behave as they do. In other words, this little fragment of the creation is pushing us into evolution. And the water pushes the waves. And just as with the waves, there is an interplay of wind and water, and they are influenced by the moon so that they can come together. The human being, the body and the consciousness work together through the power of the spirit so that there is life and evolution. This book is very, very important. It's called The Way to Live. I recommend that you get it if you haven't gotten it yet. One of the other principles that I learned from this book, is the principle of striving. And I'll read this one short little paragraph. Remember, striving is one of the creational natural laws. Love is one of the creational natural laws. The other creational natural law that we talked about is the law of harmony, and then the law of reincarnation. And these are just a few of the creational natural laws. There are more of them. But striving is critical to keep you happy. So you need to kind of evaluate that and how happy do you want to be? Do you want to be unhappy? Lay around and do nothing. You'll be unhappy, I guarantee you. Especially if you've been a person that's worked hard in the past. Won't take you long until lying around and doing nothing will interrupt your whole thought pattern and put you in a very neutral, or very negative, or usually just a very negative point of view. To be without striving means unwillingness and affliction. Affliction is inhibited striving and inhibited life. But inhibited striving and inhibited life bring inhibited evolution, stagnation. Hopelessness. Now let me talk about hopelessness for a little bit, because hopelessness is a clue, a strong clue, that your thinking is not neutral positive anymore. Another clue is confusion. If you feel hopeless and confused, you need to focus on a moment of gladness. You need to try to meditate. You need to get striving. You need to do one of those things. And music can help you a lot to put you back in a neutral, positive state of mind. Spending a little time in nature can also be very, very helpful for you. But do not allow yourself to fall into joylessness and cognitionlessness, unpeace, disharmony. All this comes from a lack of striving, lovelessness, resentment, self-deceit, and you'll have a reluctance for life. And all of these are clues to you to get striving. A delectation, which is kind of a satisfaction, harmony and happiness, as well as everything positive, come from this striving. But grief and everything negative are in the end only the revelation of how pronounced the striving is. So if your striving is pronounced, then you will have happiness and an inner sense of peace. But once you slack, it's really a two-edged sword here. So we have to keep striving to be happy. Remember, that's the purpose of this lifetime that you're in right now is your conscious evolution. And your thoughts have a tremendous power, and you can control the circumstances of your life. And you can help to be a person that prevents us from falling into the potential civil war that may be coming by the year 2020. Anyway, we'll talk to you again. Have a great evening.